Before Rome conquered the world, Rome carved its gods in stone. In darkened museums across Europe and Italy, marble faces still watch, eternal, impassive, terrible. Tonight we walk among them, every deity, every hero, every force that shaped an empire that ruled for 1,000 years. But there is one god whose face the sculptors feared most. One presence so dark that it haunted the minds of emperors until the very end. Stay until the end. The Romans did not invent their gods. They inherited them from Greece, adapted them and made them their own. But what emerged was distinctly Roman. Gods of empire, gods of war, gods who demanded order, obedience, and blood. In the halls of the Museo Nazionale Romano and the Vatican, we find them all. More than 30 deities carved in marble, stone, and bronze. Each one tells a story of power, ambition, and the rise and fall of human civilization. We begin at the summit. Jupiter, called Iapiter by the Romans, sits as king of all gods just as he did in Greece. But where the Greek Zeus was a lover of mortal women, a seducer, a wanderer, Jupiter is something harder. Jupiter is the god of law, of the state, of empire itself. He holds the thunderbolt not as a weapon of passion but as an instrument of justice. His temples stood at the center of every Roman city. Kings swore by him. Generals prayed to him before battle. Juno was his wife, and like many divine marriages, theirs was filled with rage and jealousy. In Rome, Juno became something unexpected, the protector of the state, the mother of Rome itself. She was Juno Regina, the queen. While Jupiter wielded the thunderbolt, Juno wielded political power. Women prayed to her for safe childbirth. The state honored her with festivals. Yet she was also remembered as jealous and vindictive. Her wrath against Jupiter's lovers was legendary, passed down in marble and in story. Neptune was not merely the god of the sea in Roman hands. He became the god of Rome's naval power, the guardian of the empire's greatest advantage, control of the Mediterranean. Ships bore his image. Sailors carved his name into wood and stone. Yet the Romans also remembered him as dangerous, a god whose moods shifted like the tides themselves. One moment calm, the next moment unleashing storms that could destroy entire fleets. Neptune was power that could not be fully tamed. Mars stands apart from his Greek counterpart Ares. Where Ares was chaotic battle fury, Mars was the god of disciplined warfare, the god of legions, of strategy, of martial virtue. He was the father of Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome itself. Every legion carried his standards into battle. Every soldier invoked his name. Mars was not the god of senseless slaughter. He was the god of Rome's military might, which transformed a city into an empire. Minerva was Rome's answer to Athena, but transformed again. She was wisdom, yes, but also the goddess of craft, strategy, and civilized warfare. While Mars represented the brute force of legions, Minerva represented the intellect that directed them. She was honored by engineers, architects, and scholars. Her temples were centers of learning. Rome understood that empires were not built by warriors alone. They were built by minds that could plan, calculate, and foresee. Venus held a unique place in Roman mythology, not just as a goddess of love and beauty, but as the ancestral mother of Rome. Aeneas, the founder of Rome's royal line, was her son. This transformed her into something far more politically significant than a mere deity of romance. She was honored as a symbol of Roman ancestry, of the bloodline that justified imperial rule. Love and beauty, yes, but also dynastic power and legitimacy. Apollo in Rome remained much as he was in Greece, god of the sun, of music, of prophecy, of healing, and of light itself. But Roman emperors claimed a special connection to Apollo. Augustus, Rome's first emperor, declared himself Apollo's chosen vessel. Later emperors would do the same. This transformed Apollo from a distant deity into a political symbol, a god whose favor could justify an emperor's rule. His presence in sculpture symbolized divine approval of imperial power. Diana, the Roman form of Artemis, was the goddess of the hunt, of wild places, and of the moon. But she was also a protector of women and the city itself. Unlike some other goddesses, Diana was fiercely independent. She took a vow of eternal virginity and spent her days hunting in forests beyond civilization's reach. Yet paradoxically, she also protected cities and their inhabitants. Diana represented a kind of untamed power that could not be fully controlled or possessed. Mercury was Rome's patron of commerce, eloquence, and thieves, a god suited to a civilization built on trade and communication. He carried the caduceus, a staff of two intertwined serpents, a symbol of negotiation and balance. Unlike the other gods who demanded temples and grand sacrifices, Mercury was present in everyday life, in the marketplace, in the merchant's scale, in the words exchanged between men. He was the god of civilization's Greece, the force that made society function. Vesta was the Roman goddess of the hearth and home, but her significance went far beyond domestic comfort. The Temple of Vesta in the Roman Forum housed an eternal flame tended by the Vestal virgins. This flame represented the heart of Rome itself. If it ever went out, disaster would follow. Vesta embodied the idea that civilization depended on the continuity of sacred fire, the unbroken chain of family, home, and state. She was quiet, but her presence was absolutely essential. Ceres was the goddess of grain and agriculture, the foundation upon which all civilization rests. Without grain, there are no cities, no armies, no empire. The Romans honored Ceres with festivals at harvest time. Her mysteries at Eleusis in Greece were some of the most sacred rites in the ancient world. She was not a god of conquest or war, but of something more fundamental, the earth's willingness to feed humanity. An empire that forgot Ceres would starve. Vulcan was the god of fire and metalworking, and unlike the other gods, he was explicitly ugly. The sculptures show him as lame, deformed, yet possessing a terrible power. Fire and metal made Rome's weapons, Rome's tools, Rome's empire. Vulcan represented the idea that great power often comes from those the world overlooks. He toiled in volcanic forges beneath the earth, creating the thunderbolt for Jupiter himself. His ugliness was irrelevant. His work was magnificent. Bacchus came late to Rome, arriving from the east with mystery cults and ecstatic rituals. He was the god of wine, theater, transformation, and divine madness. Where other gods represented order and civilization, Bacchus represented what civilization might lose: reason, control, boundaries. He was both beloved and feared. Roman authorities banned his most ecstatic mysteries because they threatened social order, yet his festivals were wildly popular. Bacchus showed Romans that control always has limits. Janus stands alone among Roman gods, a deity with no Greek equivalent. He was the god of beginnings, endings, doorways, and transitions. He is always depicted with two faces, looking simultaneously backward into the past and forward into the future. Every door in Rome was sacred to Janus. Every new beginning required his blessing. The month of January is named for him. Janus represented Rome's understanding that change was constant, that every ending was also a beginning. We now turn from the 12 Olympians to Rome's heroes, mortals who achieved such greatness that they transcended death itself. Hercules was not originally Roman, but Rome claimed him. His 12 labors represented the struggle against impossible odds. But what made Hercules especially important to Rome was his end. He was granted apotheosis, immortality, elevation to godhood. This taught a profound lesson, that mortal effort could achieve divine status. An emperor could aspire to become like Hercules. Aeneas was Rome's true ancestor, the Trojan hero whose flight from burning Troy led to the founding of the race that would become Roman. While Hercules was a symbol of strength, Aeneas was a symbol of duty. He carried his aged father on his shoulders as he fled Troy. He resisted the seductions of Dido to fulfill his destiny. Aeneas showed that heroism meant sacrifice, that greatness required putting duty before personal desire. Every Roman child learned his story. The Dioscuri, Castor and Pollux, were twin brothers born from an egg laid by Leda, the mortal woman seduced by Jupiter in the form of a swan. They represented loyalty, brotherhood, and the bond between warriors. They appeared on the battlefield to aid Rome in moments of supreme danger. Yet their story contained tragedy. Castor was mortal, Pollux immortal. When Castor died, Pollux begged to share his immortality. The gods allowed them to share heaven and earth, spending eternity separated yet forever bound. Romulus was the legendary founder of Rome itself. According to tradition, he and his brother Remus were the sons of Mars, raised by a she-wolf after being abandoned as infants. When they grew to manhood, they founded a city on the Tiber River. But Romulus killed Remus in a dispute over the city's boundaries, a brutal beginning that foreshadowed Rome's willingness to use violence to achieve greatness. Romulus was elevated to godhood, becoming Quirinus, a symbol of Rome's martial foundation. Beyond the gods and heroes came monsters and forces of chaos. The Furies, terrible spirits of vengeance and madness, were depicted in sculpture as serpent-haired, torch-bearing beings of wrath. They pursued those who committed crimes against blood relatives, driving them to madness across the earth. They represented justice without mercy, punishment without forgiveness. The Romans understood that justice sometimes required unleashing forces that could not be easily contained or controlled. The Gorgons, particularly Medusa, represented the power to petrify with a single glance. Medusa was once beautiful, then cursed to become a monster whose very visage turned men to stone. She was killed by Perseus, the hero, and her severed head became a weapon itself. Roman warriors wore the Gorgon's image on shields as protection. What the Romans understood was that the most dangerous power was the power to stop, to freeze, to render enemies immobile, the power of terrible certainty. The Minotaur was a being trapped between two worlds, half man, half beast, neither fully one nor the other. He dwelt in the labyrinth at the heart of Crete, fed on human tributes, a monstrous threat to civilization. Yet the Minotaur was also a victim, created through no fault of his own, imprisoned through no choice of his own. The Romans saw in the Minotaur a cautionary tale about the dangers of hubris, of violating nature, of transgression that could not be undone. Cerberus, the three-headed hound of Hades, guarded the gates of the underworld itself. No soul could cross into death's realm without passing this monstrous guardian. The Romans depicted Cerberus with terrible power, massive jaws, serpent's tail, eyes that blazed with eternal vigilance. He represented the ultimate threshold, the boundary between life and death, between the living world and the realm beyond. No wall, no lock, no guardian was as absolute as Cerberus. The Titans represented the old gods, the powers that ruled before Jupiter and the Olympians. Titan figures appear in Roman sculpture as monumental, ancient, defeated yet still possessed of terrible grandeur. They embodied the idea that empires fall, that even the mightiest forces are eventually surpassed. Rome saw itself as successor to the Titans, inheritor of their power, their legacy, their role as world shapers. But Rome also understood the warning. Empires like the Titans could fall. The Sphinx posed a riddle to travelers: answer correctly and live, answer incorrectly and be devoured. She represented the power of knowledge as a weapon, of words as a form of combat. The Romans valued eloquence and rhetoric as deeply as swordplay. A skilled orator could sway empires. The Sphinx embodied this truth, that the right words spoken in the right way could be deadlier than any blade. Intelligence itself was a form of power. The greatest threat Rome faced was not external enemies alone, but internal corruption and the decay of virtue. The Romans understood that empires destroyed themselves from within. As time passed, the virtues that built Rome, duty, courage, justice, discipline, began to erode. The gods were worshipped still, but belief in them weakened. The very marble sculptures that once inspired awe became merely decorative. And in that weakening faith lay the seeds of collapse. And so we arrive at the final god, the one whose face the sculptors feared to carve. The Romans called this god Pluto, or Dis, lord of the underworld. He was not evil precisely, but he was inevitable. Every human, every emperor, every god must eventually surrender to him. Pluto was the only god even Jupiter could not fully command. He represented the one absolute truth that no empire could deny: death comes to all things. Even Rome itself must eventually descend into darkness. The sculptures of Rome endure long after Rome itself has fallen. The marble gods remain in their museums, eternally young, eternally beautiful, eternally immortal. But they have become something other than what they were. No longer the living forces that shaped an empire, but rather the ghosts of an empire that tried to carve permanence into stone. They remind us that all power is temporary, all empires mortal, and that the only true immortality is the stories we leave behind. Which god do you think should have been most feared? Was it Jupiter's absolute authority, or Mars's relentless conquest, or Pluto's inevitability? Tell me in the comments below. I read everyone. And if you want to walk the next hall of gods in stone, subscribe now. We have many more pantheons to explore, many more sculptures waiting in the darkness. Thank you for witnessing history with me tonight.